And I'm Margaret Lilani. I'm the Vice President of Talent Solutions at Upwork, and we are here to share some insights on the future of work and findings from our Upwork Freelance Forward data. Freelance Forward is a report that we've been doing for the past 10 years that shares insights and trends around freelancing and the future of work. So let's get into it.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Margaret. I think it's great that you've got this historical perspective too. I think one of the data points that stood out to me this year was we found that over 64 million Americans have engaged in freelancing. So, looking at the 10-year trend, this is the most that we've actually ever seen within our research before. That makes up about 38% of the US workforce, just to put that in proportion. I'm curious to get your view. Why do you think there's so many more Americans entering the freelance market today?
Yeah, Kelly. So that is an excellent question. Freelancing is a consistent and growing part of the US workforce, and I would argue that it's one that's here to stay. We attribute this to a macro shift in the workforce where people are questioning those old ways of working. Instead of being willing to return to an office with 9 to 5 hours and minimal flexibility, professionals want an alternative, and that alternative is freelancing. It gives them greater flexibility, autonomy, and earning power. And these are all reasons why more and more professionals are freelancing today.
That's so interesting. And I'd love to talk to you now maybe about some of the generational breakout we found too. So this is going to actually be a two-part question. I wanted to look at both bookends for a second. To no surprise, we continue to see really massive adoption of the Gen Z level of freelancing. We found 52% of all Gen Zers this past year engaged in freelancing. We then saw from a millennial perspective, 44% were engaged in freelancing. So I'd love to get your perspective on that. But I also would love to get your perspective because I think to me, one of the actually more exciting groups that are growing both on our platform and what we're seeing within the market is around the older generation, people who are making a second career choice, who are really opting into freelancers. As we look at the data set, we found that, as we look at that baby boomer population plus 13% of all US freelancers fall within that age group as well. So from a two-part perspective, would love to get your point of view. What do we think of the younger people coming on? And then what do we think about the aging population that's also seeing this as a viable source of income?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked that question because the observations that we're having about those bookends, as you so aptly called them, are really exciting here. And I think there's some themes that hit for both of those groups that are going to be really important. So again, career paths like freelancing are going to give both ends of the spectrum that unparalleled freedom to control their work, control how they work, control when they work, and control where they are working, and to determine their own rates. So this is going to be especially true for those younger professionals who these are the people who have been raised as digital natives. These are kids who grew up with the iPhone, if we can believe it, and who were raised on the internet. They have never known anything different. Social media has always been present for them. And they're creating a new blueprint for career opportunities outside of the traditional corporate world and path. That is not the only road that they see ahead of them. Also, for younger professionals, there's uncertainty around college, there's uncertainty around internships, and there's uncertainty around the job market. And those are coinciding with this mindset shift in how people are thinking about work. And so the net of that is that many of these young people are freelancing because they can find work in their desired field while also creating a balance that is best suited to their lives, which is something that we haven't really seen in prior generations that have been entering the workforce. So really, really interesting there. Now, on the flip side of that, the old prescription, the old path that we gave to people who were exiting the workforce was you go, you retire, you maybe collect Social Security, maybe you play some golf and see some friends, but that's not good enough. People are living longer. The social safety net isn't necessarily what they need it to be, and so people need options later in their careers that weren't necessarily either necessary or present a decade or two ago. And so what we see for that boomer generation is that not only are they wanting and now able to continue their earning potential, but they can also continue to find purpose in doing the work that they have become experts in over their longer careers and continue to add and deliver value to companies as they are progressing. And so really, really, it's certainly multifaceted, but what we're seeing again across those two groups is that the increase in freelancing is very much here to stay.
I love that. That's awesome. I'm curious, just real quick to your point, and going to go off record for a second or off our flow. We've got this stat here that looks at like what type of freelance work that's happening on our platform. And I think that's something that continues to, as I look over year that's growing. I'd just be curious to get your commentary on it. Is as we look at influencer style content, we've got almost 25%. The actual number is 23% of all freelancers today are engaging in some sort of content creation. What do you think about that? I mean, that might be more of a Gen Z trend, but is that a promise as we think about creating economic value that you see continuing to happen over the next couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think about this in a couple of different
Okay.
ways. Again, one, this wasn't really present a decade ago. And so with anything that's new, you're going to see an uptick in usage and consumption of it. You think about software development at the advent of the internet, and that was a field that absolutely took off. And so we may see a similar trend line here as this is just a part of our world. And so people are going to be doing the work that needs to be done to grow part of an industry. The other piece of this, though, is unlike software development, which requires formal training to be able to give you a career path in it. Being an influencer is something that many people think that they can try, and many people can find success in without having to go and learn a programming language or develop a technical expertise. And so to many, it may feel a bit more approachable because everybody's an expert on something. Everybody has the network in which they live. And so being able to step into a digital career where perhaps you can try it on the side, and then if it takes off, it can really become a not only reason for being and also a meaningful stream of income, but also something that you can be an expert in an area where you're passionate. So I think we will continue to see more of it. I think we'll probably see some consolidation. We'll see some advancement with certain technologies, but it's definitely one to follow.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think maybe what's so interesting is maybe this is partly why we saw this within the data this year as well. But we know freelancers actually really positive. They think the best years are yet ahead. We've got over 85% of freelancers today that actually think the future is bright. Why do you think that might be from a freelancer perspective?
Yes. And so, Kelly, I know that this is a subject that is near and dear to you because just ahead of our Freelance Forward, you and the Research Institute released your inaugural research report. So I'm going to flip that question right back to you. And I'd love to hear a little bit about this from your perspective.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing. When the world is marked by so much complexity and uncertainty, I do love the human spirit and the resiliency that we see within this data and the optimism. As I think through the research we just fielded from the Research Institute on work innovators, we really found three things that leading companies who are gaining performance gains right now were having. The first attribute was really embracing new technologies. Obviously, right now it's generative AI is the hot technology, but these companies were wired to adopt new technologies. The second thing, which I think is going to be very critical for this conversation, is that they were creating inclusive cultures for flexibility. And then the third thing is they were enabling some level of distributed work. But I want to get back to that second point that we found work innovators were doing, because I think this is actually critical and why I agree with the freelancer community that I do think the best years are yet ahead. So much of the way that companies are wired today really result in that full-time employee core model, where you think about work and jobs in terms of staffing, really traditional ways of working. But I think what we're seeing within the data and where high-performing companies are really beginning to win in the market today is they're changing this narrative on its head. And so what they're doing is creating cultures that are inclusive to all sorts of different talent types. We can think about talent on the spectrum, where you have full-time employees on one side, a variety of other arrangements, and freelance on this side. And what's so cool about the data that I saw within this work innovator framework is that these organizational leaders had a very different mindset when it came to freelancers. So let me give you an example. We asked a simple question. I'll be curious, Margaret, maybe we can do this in real time. What is the very first word that comes to your mind when you think of freelancer? When I just use the word freelancer?
Well, I'm deep in the space. So the first
Yes.
the first word that comes to mind for me is probably independent, followed closely
Okay.
by expert. Yes.
Love that. Okay. Work innovators when I when I hear that answer. So what we heard from our work innovators, the ones that were high performing organizations, when they asked them, what is the first word you think of? We heard exactly what you just said: creative, skilled, flexible, access to specialized talent I don't have in house, that expertise. When we compared it to their peers, which is still the majority of organizations today, we heard very transactional words: contractor, gig, freelancer, cheap, fast. And so we heard these transactional words emerge. And so what my hope is, and I think why the future is still bright from an organizational perspective and a freelancer perspective, as more work innovators continue to create organizations that become inclusive of freelancers, one is going to create economic opportunity for those outside their organization. But just as importantly, is bringing in specialized talent and skills that they can't get elsewhere to have deep expertise, to be creative and to innovate. And I think this is going to be the way we work in the future.
Yeah, I am right there with you, and I will pull in my own anecdote here.
Okay.
So I have the privilege to oversee a very large and globally distributed team here at Upwork. And actually, less than 10% of my team, even though it's represented in 90 plus countries, less than 10% of my team is full-time employees. There is no way that I would be able to run the business that I run here at Upwork without being able to tap into those pockets of talent. And whether it is a team that's going to be running on a particular function that's going to allow us to serve our clients, or it's going to be tapping into specific expertise that I don't have in-house, this is the way that we work. And so I'll give you an example. I have 3 expert consultants that I'm working with right now, because I have had some time critical projects that I've needed to get through in order to drive my own growth activities. One is a systems expert, and I didn't have the systems expertise in-house. I thought I was going to engage her for a couple of months, but she's been consulting with me for roughly 5 hours a week for the last 3 years. And we've been able to take certain systems in our business further and faster than we ever could have without her. There's a second who I have doing deep vertical research for a go-to-market exercise for me. And again, I didn't have that deep vertical expertise in-house. And this individual has been able to turn around go-to-market activity for me in weeks instead of months or even quarters. And then the third I've been working with on an implementation consultation project. And again, didn't have either the bandwidth or the dedicated expertise in-house. And so was able to identify an expert who is part of our expert vetted talent population here on Upwork and work with that individual to get me to a place that I needed to be by the end of the year. And without that, there's no way that I would have been able to get these things done. So to your point around, are these folks contractors? Are they temporary employees? Absolutely not. These are experts that I need in my business to be able to execute against my own growth goals. And I'm able to do it in a way that allows me to do so quickly, but within the confines of my own working ways. So
Yeah.
really, really exciting to feel it in real life.
I think it's an awesome example you just gave, Margaret, because one, it's real. I mean, it's the one thing, I'm the data person. I come up with the stats of how we think things are working, but I think you're living and breathing this every day and a true testament to the power of this. And I think this is one of the mindset shifts that still has to take place that we found within our data. As we think about the freelance work that people are engaged on, I'm not sure the perception always comes through these high skilled value activities, that, like those 3 examples you just gave. Yet within our data set, we found in 2023, this past year, 47% of all freelancers were engaged in high skilled work, just like the example you gave. And so I do think we're going to continue to see this trend upwards as organizations need to leverage and access highly skilled talent. The freelance market is a great place to go look.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think that is a great segue because you touched on it a couple of minutes ago. But one of the topics that's been incredibly hot this year for both businesses and freelancers is AI. So question to you, with all of the data that you have in hand, is AI a friend or is it a foe?
I love that question. So, I think obviously there's a lot of nuance to this, but I think overall the message is AI is a friend, especially to the freelance community. And I see this data point to support this. As we look out at the data, skilling right now and being able to augment yourself with this technology, I think is where the promise of this holds. It's not a technology that's meant to automate, but really augment the human potential here. But that requires upskilling. And what we see within the data is that freelancers in particular are 2.2 times more likely to be using AI frequently in their workflows today already. That's a pretty big deal. And that's a pretty big delta as we think about comparing these populations. This is supported by other research I've seen a couple years ago that Deloitte ran that continued to show that because freelancers, one, they're fully responsible for their own career journey. They're fully responsible to want to work effectively and to move with efficiency. And so this mindset towards learning, we tend to see much more frequently within the freelancer community. And so I think my message today is like, if you're leading an organization and you're in an organizational leadership position, the freelance market is likely the market to go find some of the best top Gen AI talent that's out there right now. Like I said, 2.2 times more likely to be upskilling themselves and working with these new tools, which again, both helps companies become more efficient and productive, but also unleashes much more potential and innovation, both within the freelancers world and also their organization. So I see AI as a friend because I think it's going to create this great win-win relationship for both the freelance community as well as the organizations.
Yeah, I love that, and that data is so important. It's so interesting to me that and I talk with a lot of companies, and their biggest fear isn't like is AI my enemy? It's I don't know how to use this thing.
Yes.
I want to harness the power of AI, but I simply don't know how to get there. And given that we found that freelance and independent talent are the ones who are upskilling, who are becoming more and more knowledgeable, who are using these new technologies day to day. There's this incredibly rich resource, which is that talent pool, who can not only use the talent but also teach us how to use it. And so I will tell you, this is one of the things that we've done this year, where we've tapped into some of the talent on Upwork to better understand how they're using that technology, and then we have adopted some of those processes for our own world. And then we're also able to consult with our clients on like really filling them in on how they can best leverage both talent and technology together.
Oh, I love that. I think that's great. So, Margaret, I'm curious, as we, look into 2024, the future of work, do you have a hot take? What do you think's up ahead that everyone should be paying attention to as we go into the new year?
Yes, I do, and
Okay.
so it's more a learning, but it's definitely a learning for the future. So if we look back on the last couple of years, even before 2020, but if we focus on 2020 through this end of 2023, the world is a strange place. The unexpected happens a lot. And whether it's technology or world events or climate change or, pandemic or what have you, there are surprises that continue to arrive on our front door that if we're not flexible and we're not ready to be agile, both personally and professionally, they're going to find us having to take a step back and at the very least slow down. And so what I love about the future of work for 2024 is the ability to drive business continuity. Again, speaking from personal experience, I have a team that's operating in 90 different countries. And so I know that, if something is going awry in one part of the world, there's parts of my team that I can rely on in other parts of the world. If a technology is adopting faster in one part of the world, we can learn from what's going on there and help educate and upskill our talent in another part of the world. If there is a need to support talent, we can learn from prior events and prior experiences to be able to provide the right type of support to the talent in the part of the world that may need it a little bit now more than ever. And so going into 2024, I feel well prepared. Who knows what's coming next? But I know if these last 3 years have taught us nothing at all, that having a distributed team that is so agile, we're ready for what's coming next. So that's my hot take. How about you?
Yeah, I love that. And I love also business continuity that makes so much sense and like resonates so deeply too as we think through all the disruption that's occurred over the last several years. So I love that take. I think for me, I've been studying the future of work now, which is hysterical to really think about, over a dozen years. And I think we're starting to enter the future if if I had to guess. But I think the thing that we still haven't quite got right in many organizations that I'm just calling now job disruption. Because I think to your point, there has been so much complexity and so much disruption over the last several years that we focus so much just on survival, of trying to keep the business surviving, individuals surviving. I mean, we had a global pandemic, multiple macroeconomic shocks happened at the same time. And so as we think about that environment, I think there was a sense, and we saw this within some of our data, of leaders just wanting to maintain the status quo, to make sure that they're driving their business operations forward and even find efficiency. We saw that in the majority of the research we conducted this year. But what I did see, which gives me a lot of promise and becomes my hot take for next year, is these 23% of leaders who are actively disrupting the way work is done within the organizations. Too many companies, I think, lifted the existing playbook and just put it into a remote environment during the pandemic years, and yet didn't do the deep transformational change that actually has to take place at a job unit level. of how we work together. How do we think about, instead of, tasks that are static, a much more, like you mentioned, agile, fluid workforce that's able to come in and out and leverage their expertise. And so to me, as much as this might sound as a negative, I actually see this as a positive, because the more that we can actually disrupt the fundamental job itself and really rethink through work, the way we work together, the hours we work, where we work, really write a whole new playbook, I think then we can really capture the mainstream opportunity that's here that we're talking about from a freelancer perspective, creating flexible cultures, embracing new technology. To do all these things and do all these things well, I really think we have to fundamentally rethink the way we even think about work and the job itself in the new year.
Yes, yes, 100 times yes. I am right there with you. And I feel like that's probably a perfect way to send us off here. Hot takes for 2024, and having the flexible mindset and the right kind of culture to be able to adopt it. So thank you so much for chatting today.
Thanks so much, Margaret.